Jai Hind to all and welcome to this video lecture of tax planning and management. I am going to discuss return filing under GST today, and this topic is related to unit number 5. After registration of GST, I have already discussed the procedure in your previous video. Then after registration you can start your normal business, right? At the end of financial year or even at the end of the month, the GST return will be filed. There is certain due dates for the GST registration and payments of GST. The business entity will require filing of GST return on due date after obtaining online GST registration, and after GST registration you will get GSTN number. This required the GST return that is based on the annual turnover of a taxable person. If annual turnover is less than 1.5 crores, then one needs to submit the return quarterly basis. And if it is more than 1.5 crore, then monthly return is required. One needs to provide details of purchase, sales on the due date of the GST return. That means you have to fill all the detail related to purchase of material, related to sale of the product in the GST return. Failure of filing GST return will attract a penalty. That is an offense. If you are taxable, right, under GST, you have sales, you have turnover, you have purchase transaction, and even you are not filing your GST return. Even if you're not doing any business activity, your sales is zero, your purchase is zero, then also nil return is required within due date. These are the payment due dates. How? That means the date to which your GST should be paid. In general cases, it is 20th of next month. 20th of next month means suppose all the sales, all the transactions are done in January, that means for the month of January. Collect all the transaction detail and calculate the tax, right? All the tax final liability should be paid within 20th of February. For January it is 20th of February, 20th of next month, and so on. For the SSCs, for the taxpayer who are opting composition scheme, they are taxable under composition scheme. The due date of tax is 18th of the next month or next quarter. For the composition scheme, return will be filed quarterly and tax is also payable quarterly. So 18th of the next month of the quarter. As soon as the quarter is completed, then the next month up to the 18th day. For example, for the first quarter, which is started on 1st April, May, June. June is the last day of the 30th June is last date of the quarter. Then you have to pay your total GST liability within 18th of July. That is for the SSCs having composition scheme. For non-resident, it is 20th day of next month. For input service distributor, it is 12th day of next month. For TDS deductor, it is 10th day of next month. And for TCS collector, it is 10th day of next month. These are the types of GST returns which are required to file by the different SSCs and their relative due dates. For GST 1, GST return, R stands for return, GSTR1, the due date is 10th of every month and it should be filed by all the registered person. Similarly for GSTR2, the date is 15th of every month. It is also required to file by all the registered person. GST3, 20th of next month, 20th of every month, it is required to file by all the person. GSTR4, GST return 4 is applicable on the registered taxpayers under composition scheme. That means a person who is opted the composition scheme and they are required to file return quarterly. In that situation, GST, the type of return will be GSTR4 and due date will be 18th of April, July, October and January. Okay. Next is, that means for first quarter started from April, May, June. the due date for filing return will be 18th of July. That is an example. GSTR 5, this return is required for non-resident taxable person and the due date is 20th of every month and within 7 days after expiry of registration. That is the requirement. GSTR 6 is required to be filed by input service distributor and the due date is 13th of every month. GSTR 7 is required by authorities deducting TDS. If any businessman is deducting TDS, then GSTR 7 is required and due date is 10th of every month. Similarly, for e-commerce operator, either inventory model or aggregator, they are required to file GSTR 8 and the due date is 10th of every month. Then it comes to GSTR 9. GSTR 9 is required to be filed by registered person and due date is 31st December of next financial year. Okay, this is an annual requirement. This is not a monthly requirement and it is filed by each and every registered person. GSTR 10, it is required to be filed by registered person with surrendered or cancelled GST registration. If you are surrendering your registration, you are cancelling your business operation, then GSTR 10, that is the final return which must be filed within 3 months of cancellation of GST registration. That is the last one. Again, this is the same thing which I have discussed earlier, nothing new. These GST return details, due date, I have discussed earlier. This is the different type of presentation only. Now, what is composition scheme? Okay. So, the composition scheme is basically introduced under GST for the small business person. The businessman having turnover less than 75 lakhs. They can opt for a scheme. There are certain benefits. The rate of GST is lower than the normal one. And this scheme is very beneficial. So any person, any businessman whose turnover is less than 75 lakh can go for composite scheme, can opt for composite scheme, but they have to comply all the conditions, the documentation, the return requirement under this scheme. If the taxpayer crosses the above mentioned limit, then he become ineligible for the same. That means if your turnover for any particular year suppose is 80 lakhs, then you are not eligible for composition scheme. You will be treated as normal trader, normal manufacturer, businessman, and the normal provisions will be applicable. What are the details? Dealers supplying only goods can opt for this scheme. That means service providers are not eligible for this scheme. Is not applicable on the service provider. However, restaurant service provider are excluded. This is the only exemption. Restaurants are allowed to go for composition scheme. Composition scheme is not available to dealers supplying interstate goods or a dealer supplying through e-commerce operator. Obviously, e-commerce operator, they are not allowed to opt this composite scheme. Dealers are not allowed to collect composite tax from the recipient of supplies and neither they are allowed to avail input tax credit. This is the condition. The rate under composition scheme is 1% for traders, 2% for manufacturers and 5% for restaurant service provider. 5% is for restaurant. Suppose the restaurant is in UP. So, for this 5%, 2.5% is CGST and 2.5% is SGST, the state component and the central component. Similarly, for trader, it is 0.5 for CGST and SGST and similarly for manufacturer. Now, coming to this, that what is the return filing process? Return filing process is same for all. I am taking GSTR 1. GSTR 1 is applicable for all the registered business person, either dealer, manufacturer or any person that is applicable. First is go to the website, the normal official website for GST. Then log in and navigate to GSTR 1. Obviously, you have, after registration, you have a valid login ID. By using that login ID, just enter into the enter on the website content and navigate means go to the GSTR1 page. Opt for quarterly or monthly return. There are options that your return is quarterly or monthly depending upon your turnover. So opt for that. Generate GSTR summary. Third step is you are required to generate a GSTR1 summary. Then for that GSTR summary, you are required to fill all the details of your sales, your purchases, your input credit and all. After generating this GSTR summary, then enter the current tax, the details of current tax period including amendments. Then you have to fill all the detail related to current tax period. Then after completing all the formalities, preview GSTR1. Your return is ready. Now you can see the preview of GSTR. Okay, returns preview is available. After checking the details in the preview, then you finalize it and submit button. Click the submit button. Acknowledge and submit the GSTR1. And just after clicking the button submit button, your data will be freeze. That means you are not allowed to change the data again. Okay. File GSTR with digital signature, valid digital signature or EVC. Digital signature can be used for final submission or OTP. It can be OTP based. That option is available there. Now, what are the offenses under GST? What are the, you can say, the misconduct, the offenses under GST? The major offenses under GST are non-registering under GST even your turnover is higher than the threshold. Means your turnover is more than 20 lakh, even then you are not registering under GST. That is an offense. Supplying any goods or service without notice or issuing a false invoice, bogus invoice, fake invoice you are issuing, that is an offense. The issue of invoice using GSTN of another bona fide taxpayer. If you are manipulating the data, if you are doing wrong things, you are using GSTN of any other person, any other taxpayer, and you are issuing the invoices, wrong invoices, then it is a offense. False submission of information, giving wrong information, manipulated information under GST registration. Submission of forged financial record, document or files or fake returns to evade tax, tax evasion. For the purpose of tax evasion, if you are submitting wrong details, wrong returns, false records, then it comes under offense. Obtaining refund by means of fraud, by giving wrong information. If you are obtaining refunds, that is again an offense. Deliberate suppression of sales volume to evade tax, right? For evasion of taxes, and if you are understating your sales value, sales turnover, not giving correct sales data, that is, and intentionally if you are not doing so, that is an offense. Opting for composition scheme wrongly, even though taxpayer is ineligible. Ineligible means your sales turnover is more than 75 lakhs, even then you are going for composition scheme by not disclosing the correct information. That comes under an offense. Even non-filing of the return is also an offense under GST. What are the penalty for non-payment of GST? If you are not paying GST or the payment of GST is low, in that situation, an offender not paying his due tax is liable to pay penalty of 10% of the tax. That means there is a due date for tax payment. If you are not paying your GST within due date, right, then you are liable to pay a penalty of 10% as a 10% of the tax as penalty. This amount must not be less than 10,000. In case of short payment of tax, a minimum penalty of 10,000 has to be paid. The maximum amount can be equivalent to 10% of unpaid tax. That is the maximum and minimum limit. What about late filing of the return? As I have already told you that yes, the non-filing of the return or late filing of the return is offense. In that situation, if you are not filing your return within due date, then it will be treated as late filing. And in that situation, interest as well as late fees, both are levied on you and you are liable to pay. You are liable to pay interest at the rate 18% per annum. It has to be calculated by the taxpayer on amount of outstanding tax to be paid. It shall be calculated on the net tax liability identified in the ledger at the time of payment. The time period will be from next day of filing due date, that means starting date will be due date till the actual payment. So the interest will be calculated for that particular period only. As per GST Act, late fees of 100 per day per act. 100 per day will be applicable. So it is 100 under CGST and 100 under SGST per day per act. Means if you are filing late, the return filing is late, then 100 rupee per day will be payable for CGST and 100 rupee per day will be payable for SGST. So a total of 200 rupee per day will be payable as late fees. The maximum is 5,000 and there is no late fees on IGST. So in case of if your all the transaction are IGST, then obviously there is no late fees, but interest will be charged. If you are not depositing, you are not depositing the GST in the government account, then interest will be calculated and paid. Now what about appeals? If you are not satisfied with the procedure, if you are not satisfied with the decisions taken by the tax authorities, then yes, you have rights to appeal against them. A person who is unhappy with any decision or order passed against him under GST, they can go for the appeal. And there are you can say hierarchy, first level, second level, third level. There is a hierarchy of appeal, appellate authority. Okay. The first appeal will go to the first appellate authority, that is the basic appellate authority. They may be commissioner of GST or the authorities which are basically identified by the GST, the board. Okay. If the taxpayer is not happy even after applying to first appellate authority, if he is not happy, is not satisfied, then he can go for second appeal. The second appeal will be in the appellate tribunal. Appellate tribunal is specific tribunal for GST is there. You can apply there, right? And time limit for application is also fixed. So if then it's okay if you are satisfied from the decision of appellate tribunal, that is the last point, last authority. But if you are not satisfied, then further you can appeal to the High Court and then at last Supreme Court. You can go to the Supreme Court. But the cases which are based on facts, which are based on figures, will be concluded in the High Court, and the cases which are related to basically interpretation of the law. If there is any confusion, any doubt, any tax avoidance cases, there any doubt in the interpretation in the language of the law, then only case will be referred to the Supreme Court. So this is the hierarchy for the appeal. You can go for appeal. Obviously, it will take time, but if you are not satisfied, then there are the ways. So that's all related to GST. All these three, previous lecture, previous two, and this lecture is related to GST. The basics, the registration, the return procedure, all are discussed. And if you have any query, then you can discuss in the class and refer your book.